The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished hulls of the armored behemoths that stood in silent formation at the Fort Benning Armor Museum. The vehicles represented decades of American military might, from the stubby Sherman tanks that had stormed the beaches of Normandy to the sleek profiles of modern combat vehicles that had dominated the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. But none of them commanded attention like the massive M1A2 Abrams positioned at the center of the exhibition hall, its desert tan paint still bearing the faint outlines of its unit designation. Colonel John Steele stood before the machine, his weathered hand resting on the cool metal of its hull. At 65, his posture still retained the rigid discipline of a career soldier, though the years had etched deep lines into his face and sprinkled silver throughout his once jet-black hair. The small crowd gathered before him listened in rapt attention as his deep voice resonated through the hall. 30 years ago today, our unit crossed the Iraqi border as part of Operation Desert Storm. We were the tip of the spear, moving at 40 miles per hour through the desert night. What followed was the largest tank battle since World War II. John paused, his blue eyes momentarily distant as memories washed over him. The audience leaned forward imperceptibly. Among them were veterans nodding in silent understanding, military enthusiasts eager for first-hand accounts, and families with children who had never known the tension of the Cold War or the triumph of Desert Storm. The Iraqi Republican Guard was waiting for us at 73 Easting. What they didn't expect was the combination of American technology, training, and determination that was about to hit them. As John continued his account of the now famous battle, a tall man in his mid-30s stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed over his chest. Michael Steele watched his father with a mixture of pride and frustration. He recognized the familiar cadence of the story, having heard variations of it throughout his childhood. The tales of the Iron Horseman, his father's tank company, had been the backdrop to family dinners and holiday gatherings for as long as he could remember. Michael absently adjusted his glasses, a gesture that highlighted the contrast between father and son. Where John was all hard angles and military bearing, Michael possessed a scholar's build and demeanor. His work as a defense engineer at Anvil Defense had taken him in a different direction than the frontline service his father had embraced, creating a subtle but persistent tension between them. John's voice swelled with emotion as he described the night vision view of Iraqi tanks erupting in flames, the coordination of his crew as they executed textbook engagement procedures, and the ghostly green landscape illuminated by tracers and explosions. 9 minutes, John said, holding up 9 fingers for emphasis. In 9 minutes, Eagle Troop destroyed 28 tanks and 16 personnel carriers without a single American casualty. It wasn't just superior technology, it was the bond between tank commanders and their crews, the hours of training that turned 4 individuals into a single fighting unit. The crowd applauded as John concluded his presentation. He fielded questions with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years recounting his experiences, occasionally glancing toward his son at the back of the room. When the formal portion of the event ended, attendees dispersed to examine the exhibits more closely or to approach John personally. Michael watched as his father shook hands with admirers, signed copies of books about Desert Storm, and posed for photographs beside the Abrams. Only when the crowd had thinned did he approach. "Good turnout," Michael said, extending his hand formally. John pulled him into a brief embrace instead. "Didn't think you'd make it. Figured Anvil would have you chained to your desk." "I moved some things around," Michael replied, stepping back. "Mom would have wanted me to be here." The mention of Elizabeth Steele, gone 3 years now to cancer, created a momentary silence between them. She had been the bridge that spanned their differences, the translator who helped father and son communicate despite speaking different languages. "She would have," John agreed quietly. Then shifting back to a more comfortable subject, "How's work?" Michael shrugged. "Busy. The new guidance systems are promising, but we're still working through integration issues." Before John could respond, a voice called out from across the exhibition hall. "Thunderbolt, I was hoping I'd catch you." Both men turned to see Richard Bradley striding toward them, his expensive suit and confident gait marking him as someone accustomed to commanding attention. At 58, Bradley retained the physicality of the soldier he had once been, though his waistline hinted at too many business dinners. "Rich," John said, genuine warmth in his voice as he clasped the other man's hand. "It's been too long." Bradley clapped John on the shoulder. "Still giving the same old war stories, I see." "They get better with age," John replied with a grin. Mr. Bradley, Michael acknowledged with a nod. I didn't expect to see Anvil's CEO at a tank museum on a Saturday. I go where the talent is, Bradley replied, his gaze shifting between father and son. And today that's right here. He gestured toward the museum cafe. Got time for a coffee? The three men settled at a corner table, away from the main flow of visitors. Bradley waited until a server had delivered their drinks before leaning forward, his expression turning serious. I'll cut to the chase, John. I need your help. John raised an eyebrow. I'm retired, Rich, for real this time. That's what you said after the Gulf, and then after Bosnia, and then after your consulting stint with the Pentagon. Bradley smiled. But this is different. This isn't deployment or training. This is about creating something new. Michael watched the exchange with growing interest. Richard Bradley had been his father's executive officer during Desert Storm before leaving the military to found what would become Anvil Defense, now one of the largest private defense contractors in the country. The two men had maintained their friendship over the decades, though their paths had diverged considerably. Anvil is developing a new tank, Bradley continued, lowering his voice. Not for the U.S. military, but for the export market. John frowned. The export market is crowded. The Germans have the Leopard, the British have Challenger, and everyone else is buying modified Russian designs or developing their own. Exactly, Bradley nodded. But none of them offer what we're envisioning, a truly adaptable, customizable platform that can be configured to meet specific national requirements while maintaining core performance advantages. Michael couldn't help interjecting. Are you talking about Chimera? Bradley glanced at him sharply, then sighed. I should have known you'd be aware of it. Yes, initially, but Chimera failed its field trial 6 months ago. The adaptive suspension system couldn't handle the weight of the full combat load, and the modular armor packages compromised mobility. I heard it was a disaster, Michael said. $300 million in development, and the prototype broke down during demonstrations for potential clients. It wasn't our finest hour, Bradley admitted, but we've learned from those mistakes. We're starting fresh with a new project, one that's going to focus on practical battlefield experience over theoretical advantages. He turned back to John. That's where you come in. John set down his coffee cup. What exactly are you proposing, Rich? I want you to lead the development of our new tank platform, Project Thunderbolt. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of museum visitors and the soft museum soundtrack of martial music. You named it after my old call sign, John observed. Seemed appropriate, Bradley replied with a slight smile. I need someone who understands tanks from the inside out. Not just the engineering specifications, but how they perform in actual combat conditions. Someone who can bridge the gap between what looks good on paper and what works in the field. There are plenty of younger officers with more recent combat experience, John countered. None with your track record or reputation, Bradley said firmly. The Abrams was built by engineers who listened to tankers from Vietnam. Our next generation needs to be built by engineers who listen to veterans of the Gulf and Iraq. Michael watched his father carefully. He knew that retirement had never sat well with John Steele. The man had been at the center of armored warfare evolution for 3 decades, and being sidelined to occasional speaking engagements and museum ceremonies had been a difficult adjustment. There's one more thing, Bradley added, his expression turning grave. We have 12 months before Defense Tech unveils their new Paladin platform. If we're not ready to compete by then, Anvil could lose our position in the market entirely. Defense Tech, John repeated the name with evident distaste. Robert Gardner's company? Bradley nodded. The same. He's been poaching our talent and undercutting our contracts for years. This tank project represents a significant investment for Anvil, possibly our last chance to establish dominance in the heavy armor sector. John leaned back in his chair, studying his old friend. You're really in trouble, aren't you? I wouldn't say trouble, Bradley replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. Let's call it a critical opportunity with significant consequences. And what would my role actually entail? You'd lead the development team, full authority over design priorities, testing protocols, crew configurations, everything. Your title would be project director. Your mandate would be simple. Build the best export legal tank in the world within 12 months. John's gaze drifted toward the Abrams, visible through the cafe doorway. Michael recognized the look in his father's eyes, a mixture of calculation and longing that had preceded many of the old man's most significant decisions. I'd need to choose my own core team, John said after a moment. Bradley nodded, within reason, of course. And I'd want access to all the data from the Chimera project. No sense repeating the same mistakes. Absolutely. One more condition, John added, turning to face his son. I want Michael on the team as chief systems engineer. Michael nearly choked on his coffee. What? Dad, I'm in the middle of the guidance systems overhaul. I can't just walk away from that. Bradley interjected smoothly. Actually, I think that could be arranged. Your work on targeting systems would be valuable to Thunderbolt, and I'm sure we could find someone to take over your current responsibilities. Don't I get a say in this? Michael demanded, looking between the two older men. Of course you do, his father replied. But this is a chance to be part of something historic. How many engineers get to help design a completely new tank platform? Michael felt trapped between his professional obligations, his complicated relationship with his father, and the undeniable appeal of the project itself. Before he could formulate a response, Bradley's phone buzzed. The CEO checked it and frowned. I need to take this. Think about it. Both of you. He stood, placing a hand on John's shoulder. The world is changing, John. The kind of experience you have is becoming rarer. This might be the last chance to translate it into something tangible for the next generation. As Bradley walked away to take his call, Michael turned to his father. You planned this, didn't you? John shook his head. I had no idea Rich was going to show up today, much less offer me a job. But you immediately tried to drag me into it. Because we'd make a good team, John said simply. You understand the technology better than I ever will. I understand what works in the field better than you ever could. Together, we might actually pull this off. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. Dad, we can barely get through a family dinner without arguing about military doctrine or defense policy. How do you expect us to collaborate on something this complex? John's expression softened slightly. Your mother always said our problem wasn't that we were too different. It was that we were too similar. Both stubborn, both convinced we're right. He paused. She also said we'd accomplish amazing things if we ever learned to work together. The mention of Elizabeth again created a momentary connection between them, a shared pain that transcended their professional differences. Just think about it, John added. That's all I'm asking. 2 weeks later, John Steele stood in the cavernous main development bay of Anvil Defense's Arizona facility. The space had been cleared of its previous projects, leaving only a few workstations around the perimeter and a large central area marked with tape outlining the dimensions of a main battle tank. Morning light streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. John had spent the intervening time reviewing the Chimera project files, identifying where the previous design had gone wrong, and developing a preliminary concept for Thunderbolt. His military experience told him that successful tanks balance 3 essential elements: mobility, firepower, and protection, and that sacrificing anyone for the others often led to battlefield failure. The sound of heels clicking on concrete interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Sarah Mitchell approaching, her expression professionally neutral. As Anvil's chief financial officer, Mitchell had initially opposed bringing John onto the project, arguing that his lack of formal engineering credentials made him ill-suited to lead such a technically complex endeavor. Colonel Steele, she greeted him with a curt nod. I trust you're finding everything satisfactory. The facility is excellent, John replied, though it feels a bit empty. That's by design, Mitchell said. Richard wanted to give you a blank slate. She consulted her tablet. Your team should be arriving shortly. I've arranged for them to have security clearances and access to the relevant databases. John studied the woman before him. At 42, Sarah Mitchell represented a new generation of defense industry executives, data-driven, MBA-educated, and ruthlessly efficient. Her perfectly tailored suit and immaculate appearance projected authority, but John sensed her underlying skepticism about his appointment. I appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Mitchell, and he said, I know bringing in an outsider to head a major project isn't your preferred approach. Mitchell's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of annoyance. My concerns aren't personal, Colonel. Anvil invested heavily in Chimera, and that investment failed to yield results. Now we're diverting significant resources to a new project with an accelerated timeline, led by someone with no product development experience. She met his gaze directly. The financial risk is considerable. So is the potential reward, John countered. If Thunderbolt succeeds, Anvil will have a game-changing product in a market worth billions. If, Mitchell emphasized the word. Meanwhile, we're shifting personnel and budget from established programs with guaranteed returns. Before John could respond, the bay doors opened to admit a group of people. Bradley led the procession, followed by Michael and several others whom John didn't recognize. "Ah, perfect timing," Bradley announced cheerfully. "John, you've already met our CFO, Ms. Mitchell. Allow me to introduce Marcus Reynolds, our current chief engineer." Reynolds stepped forward, extending his hand. In his late 30s, he exuded the confidence of someone who had risen quickly through the corporate hierarchy. His firm handshake and direct gaze conveyed both professionalism and a hint of territorial concern. "Colonel Steele," he said, "your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, Mr. Reynolds," John replied. "I understand you were instrumental in developing Anvil's drone guidance systems." Reynolds nodded, accepting the acknowledgement. "Different domain, similar challenges. Precision, reliability, adaptability. Though I admit tanks aren't my specialty." "That's why we've assembled this team," Bradley interjected, "each bringing different expertise to the table." He gestured to the others. "You've requested some specific additions to the project." From the group emerged a burly man with a salt and pepper beard and the weathered complexion of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. "Doc Harrison reporting for duty," he announced with a grin that belied his 63 years. John stepped forward to embrace his old friend. Frank Doc Harrison had been a maintenance wizard during their service together, capable of keeping tanks running with limited parts in hostile conditions. After retiring from the Army, he had worked as a consultant for various defense contractors before settling into semi-retirement in rural Montana. "Didn't think you'd actually come," John said. Doc shrugged. "My wife says I've been driving her crazy puttering around the house. Told me to go play with tanks for a while." Next to step forward was Maria Gonzalez, her posture military straight despite having left the service over a decade ago. At 58, her black hair now streaked with gray, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew their exceptional value. "Colonel," she said, offering a crisp handshake, "thank you for the invitation." Maria was the best fire control systems specialist in the Corps, John explained to the others. She could calibrate an Abrams targeting computer to hit a coffee can at 3,000 meters while moving cross-country. Gonzalez smiled slightly at the praise. "Technology has advanced considerably since then, Colonel." "The physics haven't," John replied, "and neither has the need for intuitive, reliable systems that work when a crew is under fire." The last of John's personal recruits stepped forward, a tall, lean man whose perpetual squint spoke of years peering through gunners' sights. James Eagle Eye Wilson had been a legendary tank gunner, holding the record for the longest confirmed tank-on-tank kill during Desert Storm. "Still causing trouble, Thunderbolt?" Wilson asked with a crooked smile. "Trying my best," John replied. "How's civilian life treating you?" "Boring as hell," Wilson admitted. "Been teaching marksmanship to rich folks who want to play soldier on the weekends." This sounded a lot more interesting. Bradley clapped his hands together once. "Well, that's everyone. The core team for Project Thunderbolt." He looked around the assembled group. "I won't sugarcoat this. We're behind our competitors. We have limited time and resources, and the stakes couldn't be higher for Anvil." His gaze settled on John. "But we have something they don't," Colonel John Thunderbolt Steele and his hand-picked team of experts. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. "I've prepared a preliminary budget and timeline overview. I suggest we begin with a thorough review of the financial parameters." "Actually," John interrupted, "I'd like to start differently." He moved to the center of the room where the outline of the tank had been marked. "Before we talk about budgets or schedules or materials, I want to talk about purpose. What makes a great tank great isn't just its specifications. It's how well it serves its crew and accomplishes its mission." He gestured to the taped outline. "Stand here with me, all of you. This is where the commander's position will be. From here, you need visibility, communication with your crew, and awareness of the battlefield. The loader will be here." He moved to another position, needing space to handle ammunition safely and efficiently, even when the tank is moving at 40 miles per hour over rough terrain. One by one, John placed each team member in a different position. Gunner, driver, commander, explaining the unique requirements and challenges of each role. The exercise transformed the abstract concept of tank design into a human-centered reality, forcing the engineers and executives to consider the people who would ultimately operate the vehicle. "This isn't just a weapons platform or a technical specification," John concluded. "It's a home for 4 soldiers who will live, fight, and possibly die inside it. Every decision we make must serve them first." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Even Mitchell seemed affected by the shift in perspective. John could see the engineers already mentally reconfiguring their approach. thinking not just about systems, but about the humans who would use them. Bradley broke the silence. This is exactly why you're leading this project, John. He addressed the entire group. Let's make a tank that soldiers would choose to take into battle, not just one that looks good in a procurement spreadsheet. As the team dispersed to their assigned stations, Michael approached his father. That was effective, he admitted grudgingly. Just speaking the truth, John replied. Engineers sometimes forget there are people inside the machines. And soldiers sometimes forget that engineering constraints are real, Michael countered. We can't just wish away the laws of physics or material science. John smiled slightly. That's why we need both perspectives. Speaking of which, I've reviewed the Chimera files. The concept was ambitious, but they tried to innovate in too many areas simultaneously. Michael nodded. Classic scope creep. Every department wanted their pet technology included. For Thunderbolt, we need to be more focused, John said. Identify the core capabilities that matter most to export customers and execute them flawlessly. Which are? John counted off on his fingers. Reliability in harsh environments, ease of maintenance with limited infrastructure, adaptability to different mission profiles, and cost-effectiveness over the vehicle's lifetime. That's still a tall order, Michael observed. Nobody said it would be easy, John replied, but it's doable with the right team. He paused, studying his son. I'm glad you decided to join us. I haven't fully committed yet, Michael clarified. I'm still transitioning my other projects, but I'm interested enough to see where this goes. It was a small concession, but John recognized it as progress. After years of professional divergence, they were finally working in the same space, if not yet as a true team. The following weeks established a rhythm to the project. John insisted on a ground-up approach, starting with fundamental requirements rather than adapting existing designs. Each morning began with a full team meeting to review progress and address challenges, followed by focused work in specialized groups. Doc Harrison took charge of mobility and maintenance issues, bringing his practical experience to bear on drivetrain and suspension designs. Maria Gonzalez led the fire control team, insisting on systems that balance technological sophistication with battlefield robustness. Wilson worked with the weapons integration group, ensuring that the main gun and secondary armaments would deliver the accuracy and lethality needed for modern combat. Michael found himself naturally gravitating toward the electronics and systems integration challenges, areas where his expertise was most relevant. Despite his initial reservations, he became increasingly invested in the project, often working late into the evening to solve particularly thorny problems. John moved between these groups, providing the commander's perspective and ensuring that all systems would work cohesively in combat conditions. His approach sometimes clashed with the corporate development methodology that Reynolds and his team were accustomed to, creating tension that simmered beneath the surface of daily interactions. 4 weeks into the project, that tension finally boiled over. The team had gathered to review the initial hull design concepts when Reynolds presented a radical departure from conventional tank architecture. Our analysis indicates that a lower profile hull with distributed armor modules would offer superior protection while reducing the vehicle's weight, he explained, displaying elaborate renderings on the main screen. The modular approach also allows for rapid reconfiguration based on mission requirements. John studied the design with growing concern. This looks remarkably similar to the Chimera concept. It incorporates some elements, Reynolds acknowledged, but with significant improvements to the weight distribution and structural integrity. It's still fundamentally flawed, John stated flatly. The distributed armor concept compromises the core protection envelope. The modular attachment points create weaknesses that enemy weapons will exploit. Reynolds stiffened. Our simulations indicate otherwise. The new composite materials and attachment mechanisms show a 15% improvement in survivability against shaped charges. Simulations aren't reality, John countered. In actual combat, these modules will be maintenance nightmares. They'll trap sand and debris, corrode at the connection points, and eventually compromise the entire protection system. The room grew tense as the two men squared off. Other team members exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing a fundamental clash of approaches. With all due respect, Colonel, Reynolds said, his voice tight, tank design has evolved since your active service. Modern computational modeling gives us insights that weren't possible even a decade ago. And no computer model has ever had to pull a wounded driver from a burning tank, John replied, his tone hardening. I've seen what happens when theoretical improvements fail in the field. It costs lives. Bradley, who had been observing silently, finally intervened. Gentlemen, this is precisely why this team includes both perspectives. Marcus, your technical innovations are valuable, but they need to be validated against real-world experience. John, the new technologies offer capabilities worth exploring, even if they require refinement. The compromise was diplomatic, but left neither man fully satisfied. As the meeting continued, John found himself increasingly isolated from the younger engineers, who clearly aligned themselves with Reynolds' more technically ambitious approach. Later that evening, John sat alone in his temporary office, reviewing the competing design concepts with growing frustration. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Got a minute?" Doc Harrison asked, entering without waiting for a response. He carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to John. "Always for you, Doc," John replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Doc settled into a chair, his expression thoughtful. "That was quite a showdown today." "Reynolds doesn't understand what we're trying to build," John said with a sigh. "He's designing for ideal conditions, not battlefield realities." "He's not entirely wrong about the new technologies," Doc observed. "Some of these materials and systems are genuinely impressive." "I'm not against innovation," John insisted. "I just want innovations that serve the crew and the mission, not ones that look good in a corporate presentation." Doc nodded slowly. "You know what this reminds me of? That time in Kuwait when headquarters sent us those new air filters that were supposed to be resistant to sand. Remember those?" John groaned at the memory. "They clogged up faster than the old ones and were impossible to clean in the field." "Exactly. Tested in a lab, not in a desert." Doc took a sip of his coffee. "But you know what? We figured out a workaround. Combined the new filter media with our old filter frames. Ended up with something better than either one alone." "You think that's what we need here? A compromise?" "I think we need integration, not compromise," Doc replied. "Take the best of their advanced technology and combine it with the best of our practical experience." John considered this, running a hand over his face. "Maybe, but Reynolds seems determined to push his vision regardless of my input." "Then you need to change how you're providing that input," Doc suggested. "These young engineers aren't soldiers. They don't respond to authority the same way. You need to convince them, not command them." The conversation was interrupted by another knock. Maria Gonzalez stood in the doorway, her expression serious. "Sorry to intrude," she said, "but there's something you both should see." She led them to the main development floor, now empty except for Michael, who was working at a computer station surrounded by multiple screens. "Show them what you found," Maria prompted. Michael looked up, his expression a mixture of concern and anger. "I was reviewing the simulation data from Reynolds' distributed armor concept. The results seemed too good to be true, so I dug into the underlying assumptions." He pulled up a complex spreadsheet. They manipulated the parameters to favor their design. The threat profiles, the impact angles, even the material properties all tweaked just enough to make their numbers look better than they are. John studied the data, his military training helping him grasp the implications if not the technical details. "They cooked the books. Not explicitly falsified," Michael clarified, "but they put a heavy thumb on the scale. In real conditions, this design would likely perform worse than conventional armor, not better." "Who authorized this?" John demanded. "That's the thing," Michael replied. "These simulations came from outside Anvil. They're tagged as defense tech data files that someone imported into our system." John froze. "Defense tech? Robert Gardner's company?" Maria nodded grimly. "It appears someone is using their research to influence our design decisions. Or deliberately sabotaging us," Doc suggested. The implications hung heavily in the air. If someone on the Thunderbolt team was working with their chief competitor, the entire project could be compromised. "We need to take this to Bradley," John decided. "But first, I want to know who imported these files and when." Michael shook his head. "The access logs have been altered. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. But," he added, "they didn't realize our backup system would preserve metadata from the original files. That's how I found the defense tech markers." John felt a cold anger settling in his gut. This wasn't just a professional disagreement or competing design philosophies. This was deliberate sabotage from within. "Keep this between us for now," he instructed. "Doc, Maria, I want you to review all the technical specifications that Reynolds' team has produced. Look for other instances where the data might have been manipulated. Michael, see if you can trace these files back to their source." As the others nodded their agreement, John stared at the falsified data displayed on the screen. The challenge had just become significantly more complex. Not only did they need to design a revolutionary new tank within impossible deadlines, but they also had to identify and neutralize a traitor within their own ranks. Later that night, alone in his temporary apartment, John called Bradley on a secure line. "We have a problem," he said without preamble, explaining what Michael had discovered. Bradley's voice grew cold as he absorbed the implications. "Gardner has been trying to undermine us for years, but this is a new low. Planting compromised data to sabotage a competitor's design. The question is, who's helping him from inside Anvil?" John said. "Reynolds is the obvious suspect," Bradley mused. "He had access and opportunity, but it seems too obvious. Why would he risk his career for a competitor? Money, advancement, revenge for some perceived slight." John listed the possibilities. "People have betrayed for less. Or it could be someone else entirely," Bradley cautioned. "We shouldn't jump to conclusions without proof. If we accuse the wrong person, it could fracture the team beyond repair." John agreed reluctantly. "So what's our next move?" "Continue as planned, but be vigilant," Bradley decided. "I'll initiate a quiet security review to try to identify our leak. Meanwhile, you need to reset the design approach. If Reynolds and his team have been working with compromised data, we need to start fresh." "That will put us even further behind schedule," John pointed out. "Better delayed than sabotaged," Bradley replied grimly. "I'd rather deliver a viable product late than a flawed one on time." After ending the call, John stood at his window, looking out at the desert night. The stars shone with remarkable clarity in the Arizona sky, reminding him of nights spent in the deserts of Kuwait and Iraq, waiting for orders to advance. Those times had been simpler in many ways. The enemy was clearly defined, the objectives concrete. Now he faced a different kind of battle, one fought not with cannons and armor, but with data and designs, corporate politics and sabotage. Yet the stakes felt just as high. The Thunderbolt project represented more than just a business opportunity for Anvil or a professional challenge for John personally. It was his chance to translate decades of hard-earned battlefield wisdom into a legacy that would protect future generations of soldiers. With renewed determination, he turned back to his desk and began sketching out a new approach, one that would combine the best technological innovations with proven combat principles. If someone was trying to derail the project from within, they would soon discover that John Thunderbolt Steele was not easily defeated. The next morning, John called an emergency meeting of the core team, excluding Reynolds and his direct reports. In the secure conference room, he shared Michael's findings about the compromised simulation data. "From this moment forward, we're implementing new security protocols," John announced. "All design data will be independently verified before implementation. Team communications will be compartmentalized on a need-to-know basis, and we're starting fresh with our whole design." The news sent a ripple of concern through the group. Maria was the first to speak up. "Starting over will cost us weeks we don't have." "Not necessarily," John countered. "I've been thinking about a completely different approach." He activated the room's main display, showing a concept sketch he had worked on through the night. "Instead of trying to reinvent tank design from the ground up, what if we take a proven platform and enhance it with our best innovations?" The image showed a conventional tank hull paired with what appeared to be a highly advanced turret system. "The Bradtech chassis," Doc identified immediately. "German engineering, already proven in the field." John nodded. "Bradtech has the best mobility platform in the industry. Reliable, maintainable, battle-tested. Their M300 chassis has set the standard for years." "But Bradtech is a European company," Michael pointed out. "How would that work for an American defense contractor?" "Through partnership," John explained. "I've already spoken with Bradley about approaching them. The German export restrictions primarily affect complete weapons systems, not component partnerships." Maria studied the design thoughtfully. "So we combine their chassis with our weapons and fire control systems?" "Exactly. We focus our innovation on the universal turret concept." John expanded the image to highlight the turret design, a standardized interface that can accommodate different weapon systems, fire control packages, and protection levels based on customer requirements. One chassis, multiple configurations. The team leaned in, professional interest overcoming their initial skepticism. The concept was elegant in its practicality, leveraging existing excellence rather than attempting to surpass it in every dimension. "This could actually work," Michael admitted, examining the technical specifications. "The integration challenges would be significant but manageable, and it plays to our strengths in weapons and control systems." "What about Reynolds and his team?" Doc asked the question that hung in the air. They'll continue working on advanced armor concepts, John replied, but in a parallel track, not as part of the core design. If their innovations prove viable, we can incorporate them. If not, our primary approach remains sound. The strategy had multiple advantages. It reduced technical risk by building on proven components. It potentially shortened development time by eliminating the need to design an entirely new hull, and it compartmentalized the team in a way that could help identify the source of the leaked information. There's one more thing, John added, his expression grave. Someone in this project is working with defense tech. Until we identify that person, trust no one outside this room. Verify everything independently. Report any suspicious activities directly to me. The mood sobered as the implications sank in. What had begun as an ambitious engineering project had evolved into something more complex and dangerous, a race against both external competitors and internal saboteurs. As the meeting concluded, John pulled Michael aside. I need you to do something unofficial. Michael raised an eyebrow questioningly. I want you to meet with a contact at Brad Tech, unofficially before the formal corporate discussions begin. His name is Klaus Weber, their chief engineer. He's an old-school tank designer, someone who understands what we're trying to achieve. Why the secrecy? Michael asked. Because I don't want our mole reporting back to Defense Tech about the partnership before it's finalized, John explained. Bradley is handling the official channels, but I want a technical assessment from someone I trust. Michael hesitated. You're asking me to go behind the company's back? I'm asking you to help protect the company's interests, John corrected. Bradley knows about this, but the fewer people who are aware of the Brad Tech angle, the better until we know who we can trust. After a moment's consideration, Michael nodded. All right, set up the meeting, but I want it on record that I'm doing this under protest. John smiled slightly. Noted, Lieutenant. The use of the military rank, a reference to their family's traditional form of disagreement, brought a reluctant smile to Michael's face. For all their differences, there remained a fundamental trust between father and son, a bond that transcended professional disputes. As the Thunderbolt team dispersed to their new assignments, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. The project faced significant challenges, technical, organizational, and now even security-related. But they also had a clear direction forward, a strategy that played to their strengths while mitigating their vulnerabilities. In the desert-proving grounds of Arizona, a new kind of tank was taking shape not just in blueprints and computer models, but in the collaborative vision of soldiers and engineers working together. And despite the obstacles, John Thunderbolt Steele was determined to see that vision become reality, a legacy of steel and fire that would carry his lifetime of experience into the future. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the Anvil Defense testing grounds as John Steele stood watching the first Thunderbolt prototype roll across the packed dirt track. Even from a distance of several hundred yards, he could see that something was wrong. The vehicle moved with a hesitant, lurching motion that no experienced tank commander would accept. What the hell is going on with the suspension? He muttered, raising binoculars to get a better look. Beside him, Doc Harrison shook his head. Interface problems between the Brad Tech chassis and our control systems. The German electronics use different protocols than ours, and the translation layer is causing lag in the response time. John lowered the binoculars, his expression grim. 6 weeks into the project, and they were still struggling with fundamental integration issues. The partnership with Brad Tech had seemed like an elegant solution on paper, a way to combine German engineering excellence with American weapons technology. The reality was proving far more complicated. Where's Michael? John asked. He was supposed to be coordinating with the Brad Tech technical team on these exact issues. In the control center, Maria Gonzalez replied, gesturing toward a small building at the edge of the test track. He's been on conference calls with their engineers since dawn. John nodded and began walking toward the control center, his stride purposeful despite the heat. Inside the air-conditioned building, he found his son surrounded by computer screens, his expression tense as he spoke with someone via video conference. The signal latency is unacceptable, Michael was saying, his frustration evident. We're getting almost a quarter-second delay between command input and system response. In combat conditions, that could be catastrophic. On the screen, a middle-aged German engineer nodded in understanding. The problem is not with our systems, Herr Steele. Your control interface is attempting to micromanage functions that our chassis handles automatically. This creates redundant processing cycles and communication bottlenecks. John approached, catching Michael's eye. His son acknowledged him with a brief nod, but continued the conversation. We need direct access to your low-level control systems, Klaus. Without it, we can't achieve the response time required for combat operations. Klaus Weber, Bradtech's chief engineer, hesitated. Those systems are proprietary. Our management is concerned about intellectual property protection, especially given the rumors about security issues at Anvil. John felt a cold sensation in the pit of his stomach. The news about their internal security breach had somehow reached Bradtech, potentially compromising their partnership before it had fully formed. Michael's expression darkened. What rumors are you referring to exactly? Weber looked uncomfortable. There is talk in the industry that someone at Anvil has been sharing information with competitors. I should not have mentioned it. Unprofessional of me. John stepped into view of the camera. Klaus, it's John Steele. We met at the NATO Vehicle Symposium in Brussels last year. Weber's expression brightened slightly. Colonel Steele? Yes, I remember. Your presentation on crew survivability was most impressive. Thank you. Regarding these rumors, we are aware of potential security concerns and have implemented stringent protocols. I can assure you that any technical information shared with Bradtech will remain secure on our end. Weber seemed to consider this. Perhaps we could discuss a compromise, a limited access protocol that would allow your systems to interface with ours without exposing our core proprietary technology. That would be acceptable, Michael replied, shooting his father a look that mixed gratitude with lingering frustration at the interruption. I will speak with management and our legal team, Weber promised. In the meantime, I will send you a technical workaround that may reduce the latency issues you are experiencing. After the call ended, Michael turned to his father. I was handling that. I know, John replied. But when Weber mentioned the security rumors, I thought a senior presence might help reassure him. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that reminded John powerfully of Elizabeth. The leak is becoming a bigger problem every day. It's not just affecting our internal operations now, it's damaging our external partnerships. Bradley is conducting a thorough security review, John said. In the meantime, we need to focus on solving the technical challenges. How bad is the latency issue, really? Michael's expression turned professional as he shifted to the engineering problem. Critical. The current response time would make accurate fire on the move nearly impossible. The targeting system can't compensate for the delay between when the gunner pulls the trigger and when the stabilization system actually responds. John considered this. In the short term, could we modify our fire control procedures to account for the lag? In the Gulf, we had to adjust our lead calculations manually for different ammunition types and weather conditions. This isn't the Gulf, Dad, Michael said, his tone sharpening. Modern tank combat happens at ranges and speeds that require split-second timing and computer-assisted targeting. We can't just eyeball it anymore. The comment stung, reinforcing the generational divide that still separated them despite their professional collaboration. Before John could respond, the door opened to admit Marcus Reynolds. I heard we're having integration problems with the German systems, Reynolds said, his tone carefully neutral, but his expression suggesting a certain satisfaction at the difficulties. Since the discovery of the compromised simulation data, Reynolds had been marginalized in the Thunderbolt development process. His team reassigned to secondary systems, while the core design moved forward under John's direction. The demotion, though never explicitly framed as such, had created a simmering resentment that was palpable whenever Reynolds interacted with John or his inner circle. We're working through some communication protocol issues, Michael replied diplomatically. Standard challenges when integrating systems from different manufacturers. Reynolds nodded. I've had some experience with international partnerships. Perhaps my team could assist? The offer seemed genuine, but John remained wary. Until they identified the source of the security breach, Reynolds remained a primary suspect. We appreciate the offer, John said carefully, but Michael's team has established a good working relationship with the Bradtech engineers. Adding more variables at this point might complicate matters. Reynolds' expression cooled. As you wish, Colonel. Though I can't help but wonder if your traditional approach is equipped to handle the complexities of modern systems integration. The implied criticism hung in the air as Reynolds departed, leaving father and son in an uncomfortable silence. He could actually be helpful, Michael said finally. Reynolds does understand modern control systems better than most of our team. And if he's our leak, John countered, we'd be giving him direct access to our most critical technical challenges and our solutions. Michael sighed. We can't keep operating like this, Dad. suspecting everyone, compartmentalizing information, duplicating work to avoid sharing details. It's inefficient and demoralizing. I don't like it either, John admitted, but until we identify the source of the leak, we don't have much choice. He gestured to the screens displaying the prototype's performance data. Let's focus on what we can control. Show me what Weber is sending over, and let's see if we can make it work. For the next several hours, father and son worked side by side, analyzing the technical specifications from BradTech and developing potential adaptations for their control systems. Despite their differences in approach and perspective, they found a rhythm in the work, each contributing insights that the other might have missed. As evening approached, Michael sat back from his workstation, rubbing his eyes. I think this might actually work. If we implement Weber's suggestions and modify our command structure to align with the BradTech architecture, we could reduce the latency to acceptable levels. John studied the simulation results, which showed a significant improvement in response time. Good work. When can we implement these changes on the prototype? Tomorrow morning if the team works overnight on the code changes, Michael replied. We could be ready for another test run by noon. John nodded approvingly. Make it happen. I want to see this thing moving properly before our progress review with Bradley on Friday. As Michael began coordinating with the software team, John stepped outside to call Bradley on a secure line. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the landscape in dramatic hues of orange and purple. It reminded him of evenings in Kuwait, waiting for orders to advance into Iraq, the quiet tension before battle. We've had some integration challenges with the BradTech systems, John reported when Bradley answered. Nothing we can't overcome, but it's slowing our progress. What about the leak situation? Bradley asked, his voice low despite the secure connection. No concrete evidence yet, but the word is spreading. Weber at BradTech mentioned hearing rumors about security issues at Anvil. Bradley cursed softly. Gardner is spreading the story to undermine our partnerships. Classic psychological warfare. How's it affecting the team? Morale is strained, John admitted. The compartmentalized approach is hampering collaboration, and Reynolds is increasingly resentful of his diminished role. Do you still think he's our most likely suspect? John hesitated. He had the access and the technical knowledge to import and manipulate the simulation data, and he seems to take a certain satisfaction in our current difficulties, but that's hardly proof. My security team has been reviewing access logs and communication patterns, Bradley said. They've found some irregular network activity from within the Thunderbolt development area. Data transmissions to external servers at unusual hours, encrypted with non-standard protocols. John felt his pulse quicken. Can they trace it to a specific individual? Not yet. The person is using shared workstations and sophisticated masking techniques, but they're getting closer. In the meantime, how is the prototype coming along otherwise? The universal turret concept is working well, John replied, shifting to more positive developments. Maria's team has created an interface that can accommodate 3 different main gun options and multiple fire control packages. Doc has the maintenance access points perfectly positioned for field servicing. If we can solve these integration issues with the chassis, we'll have something truly impressive to show potential customers. Good, Bradley said, because I've arranged a private demonstration for a very interested party. Egyptian military representatives will be visiting in 3 weeks to evaluate the Thunderbolt as a potential replacement for their aging tank fleet. John straightened in surprise. 3 weeks? Bradley, we're nowhere near ready for a foreign military evaluation. I know it's pushing the timeline, Bradley acknowledged, but this is a critical opportunity. The Egyptians are in the market for over 200 tanks. If we can get them interested in the Thunderbolt concept now, it could mean a multi-billion-dollar contract down the line. The stakes had just been raised significantly. Egypt represented exactly the kind of export market the Thunderbolt was designed to serve a nation seeking modern tank capabilities without the budget for top-tier American or European models. A successful demonstration could establish Anvil as a major player in the international arms market and validate the entire Thunderbolt concept. We'll be ready, John promised, though internally he was already calculating the challenges they would need to overcome in the abbreviated timeframe. One more thing, Bradley added. Robert Gardner from Defense Tech has somehow learned about our partnership with BradTech. He's making noise with regulators about technology transfer concerns and potential violations of export restrictions. John frowned. There's nothing illegal about our arrangement with BradTech. Not illegal, but potentially controversial. Gardner is suggesting that We're using the partnership to circumvent German restrictions on arms sales to certain regions. It's nonsense, but it could complicate our regulatory approvals. This feels like more than competitive business practices, John observed. Gardner seems determined to destroy the Thunderbolt project by any means necessary. It's personal, Bradley admitted, has been ever since I refused to sell Anvil to Defense Tech 5 years ago. Gardner doesn't just want to beat us in the marketplace, he wants to humiliate us publicly. After ending the call, John stood watching the last light fade from the desert sky, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening blue. The challenges facing the Thunderbolt project were multiplying technical difficulties, security breaches, external political pressure, and now an accelerated demonstration timeline. Yet strangely, he felt more energized than daunted. This was the kind of complex, high-stakes situation he had thrived on during his military career, where clear thinking and decisive leadership made the difference between success and failure. He returned to the control center to find Michael still working with the software team, his focus intense as he guided them through the necessary modifications. "We need to accelerate our timeline," John announced, gathering the attention of everyone present. "Bradley has arranged a demonstration for Egyptian military officials 3 weeks from now." Michael looked up in alarm. 3 weeks? That's impossible. We haven't even solved the basic mobility issues, let alone completed the weapons integration or finalized the fire control systems. "Then we'll have to work faster and smarter," John replied simply. "The Egyptians represent exactly the market we're targeting, nations that need modern tank capabilities at a price point below the top-tier Western models. If we can impress them, even with a prototype, it could secure Thunderbolt's future." The team exchanged concerned glances, the challenge before them suddenly much more concrete and immediate. "I'll need everyone working extended hours," John continued. "Maria, prioritize getting the fire control system fully operational, even if we have to simplify some of the advanced features. Doc, I want the mobility issues resolved within a week, whatever it takes. Michael, you're our liaison with BradTech. Get them to accelerate their support and technical assistance." As the team dispersed with renewed purpose, Michael approached his father. "You're pushing them too hard. Some of these issues can't be solved just by working more hours." "In combat, you don't always get the ideal conditions or timeline," John replied. "You adapt and overcome with the resources available." "This isn't combat, Dad," Michael said, echoing his earlier frustration. "It's product development. Different rules, different constraints." John studied his son, recognizing the genuine concern behind his objection. "You're right that it's different, but some principles remain the same. Clear objectives, focused effort, creative problem solving under pressure. These people aren't soldiers, but they are professionals who respond to leadership and purpose." He placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "And they have you to guide them through the technical challenges. Between us, we can make this happen." The moment of connection was brief but significant, a small bridge across the generational and philosophical divide that separated them. Despite their differences, they shared a commitment to the project and a determination to succeed against increasing odds. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As John arrived at the facility, he was met by Sarah Mitchell, Anvil's CFO, who rarely visited the development site in person. "Colonel Steele," she greeted him, her expression serious, "I need to speak with you privately." In John's temporary office, Mitchell came directly to the point. "Bradley informed me about the accelerated demonstration for the Egyptian delegation. I have serious concerns about this approach." John leaned back in his chair. "Financial concerns, I assume?" "Partially," she acknowledged. "We're already over budget on Thunderbolt's development. Accelerating the timeline will increase costs significantly over time. Rushed materials acquisition, expedited partner support from BradTech. The potential Egyptian contract would more than justify those investments," John countered. "If it materializes," Mitchell said. "But my concerns go beyond the financial aspects. Demonstrating an unproven prototype to foreign military officials carries significant reputational risk. If the system fails or underperforms, it could damage Anvil's credibility in the international market for years to come." John considered her argument, which was not without merit. "What would you suggest instead?" "Postpone the demonstration until we have a fully functional system. Focus on getting the technology right before we start making promises to potential customers. And in the meantime, Defense Tech unveils their Paladin platform and captures the market we're targeting," John pointed out. "Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to stay competitive." Mitchell's professional composure slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern. This doesn't feel calculated, Colonel. It feels desperate. Bradley is gambling the company's future on a project that's still struggling with basic integration issues. The assessment stung because it contained elements of truth. The Thunderbolt project had encountered more difficulties than anticipated, and the accelerated timeline added significant risk. Yet John also saw the strategic necessity of Bradley's approach. In the competitive world of international arms sales, being first to market with a new concept often mattered more than having the perfect product. "I appreciate your candor, Ms. Mitchell," John said finally, "and I understand your concerns. But I believe in this team and this concept. We will be ready to show the Egyptians something impressive, even if it's not the final production version." Mitchell studied him for a moment. "Your confidence is admirable, Colonel. I hope it's justified." She rose to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I hope you succeed. Anvil needs this win, and not just financially." After she departed, John sat thinking about her words. The conversation had revealed something he hadn't fully appreciated before. Mitchell wasn't just concerned about the financial implications of the Thunderbolt project. She seemed genuinely worried about the company's future and reputation. Perhaps she wasn't the obstacle he had initially perceived her to be, but rather someone approaching the same goals from a different perspective. His reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Doc Harrison, his expression unusually grave. "We've got a problem with the Brad Tech chassis," Doc announced without preamble. "Their technical team just informed us that they've been instructed to limit their support due to intellectual property concerns." John frowned. "That doesn't make sense. We have agreements in place to protect their proprietary technology." "Something spooked them," Doc replied. Weber wouldn't give Michael specific details, just corporate speak about reassessing the parameters of the technical collaboration. This development threatened to derail their already precarious timeline. Without Brad Tech's full cooperation, solving the integration issues would become exponentially more difficult. "Where's Michael now?" John asked, "Trying to salvage what he can from the Germans. But it doesn't look good." John nodded. "Keep working on the mobility issues with whatever information we have. I'm going to talk to Bradley about this." Before he could reach his office, however, another crisis emerged. Maria Gonzalez intercepted him in the corridor, her normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. "Someone has accessed the fire control system code and introduced errors," she reported, her voice low but intense. "Subtle changes that wouldn't be immediately apparent but would cause catastrophic failures during operation." John felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just industrial espionage or competitive sabotage. Deliberately compromising safety-critical systems crossed a line into something far more serious. "How did you discover it?" he asked. "Standard code review before implementation," Marie explained. "The changes were sophisticated, inserted into areas that aren't frequently examined. If we hadn't been doing a comprehensive review because of the accelerated timeline, they might have gone undetected." "Do you know who's responsible?" Maria shook her head. "The changes were committed using Reynolds' authentication credentials, but during hours when security logs show he wasn't in the building." "Someone using his access," John suggested. "Possibly. Or Reynolds accessed the system remotely and manipulated the access logs to create an alibi." The implications were disturbing. Either Reynolds was directly sabotaging the project, or someone was going to extraordinary lengths to frame him while endangering the entire program. "Lock down the fire control code," John instructed. "Implement additional authentication requirements for all critical systems. And keep this between us for now. If Reynolds is innocent, I don't want to accuse him without proof." As Maria departed to implement the security measures, John felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him. The challenges facing the Thunderbolt project were evolving from merely technical and commercial into something darker and potentially dangerous. Someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure the project failed, regardless of the consequences. He found Michael in the communications center, his expression thunderous as he ended a video call with the Brad Tech team. "They're shutting us out," Michael reported, not bothering to hide his frustration. "Limited technical support, no additional access to their control systems, and they're talking about reviewing the entire partnership agreement." "What happened?" John asked. "Yesterday, Weber seemed willing to work with us." Michael ran both hands through his hair. "Someone sent their management team documents suggesting that we're planning to reverse engineer their proprietary technology and cut them out of future contracts. Complete fabrications, but convincing enough to make them nervous." "Gardner," John muttered. Has to be. He's trying to isolate us from our partners. Whoever it is, they're succeeding, Michael replied grimly. Without Brad Tech's full cooperation, we can't resolve the integration issues in time for the Egyptian demonstration. John paced the small room, considering their options. What if we bypass the Brad Tech control systems entirely? Develop our own interface that connects directly to the mechanical components? Michael looked skeptical. That would require completely redesigning our control architecture and potentially voiding our agreement with Brad Tech. Not to mention the technical challenges of interfacing with proprietary systems we don't fully understand. But it's theoretically possible. Theoretically, yes. Practically in 3 weeks? Michael shook his head. I wouldn't bet on it. John stopped, pacing, a new idea forming. What about your friend at MIT? The one who specializes in reverse compatibility protocols for military systems? Dr. Chen? Michael looked surprised. She's not authorized to work on classified projects. This isn't classified, it's proprietary, John pointed out. And we're not asking her to access Brad Tech's systems directly just to help us develop an interface based on publicly available information and the limited technical data we already have legally obtained. Michael considered this, his expression shifting from skepticism to cautious interest. It's in a gray area ethically and legally, but she might be able to help us develop a workaround. He paused. Dad, are you sure you want to push this boundary? It could create even more problems with Brad Tech if they find out. John's expression hardened. Someone is actively trying to sabotage this project through any means necessary. They've compromised our data, damaged our partnership with Brad Tech, and now they're directly tampering with safety-critical systems. I'm not going to let them succeed just because we're playing by rules they've already broken. The determination in his voice seemed to convince Michael, who nodded slowly. I'll contact Dr. Chen today, but this stays between us. Agreed, John said. In the meantime, we need to address the security breach directly. It's time to set a trap for our saboteur. The plan they developed was straightforward but potentially effective. With Bradley's approval, they would create a convincing but false set of technical specifications for a new armor configuration supposedly being developed for the Thunderbolt. The documents would include a tracking mechanism that would activate when opened on an external system, potentially identifying the person leaking information. Simultaneously, John instructed Maria to restore the compromised fire control code, but add subtle monitoring functions that would record any future unauthorized modifications and trace them to their source. The approach was risky, combining offensive counterintelligence with continued development, but they were running out of time and options. 2 days later, as the team worked feverishly to prepare for the Egyptian demonstration, the first breakthrough came. Michael's MIT contact, Dr. Chen, had developed a promising approach to interfacing with the Brad Tech chassis, a software layer that could translate their commands into protocols the German systems would understand without requiring direct access to the proprietary components. It's not elegant, Michael explained as he demonstrated the concept to John and Doc in the control center. There's still some latency, but it's reduced to about 50 milliseconds, not ideal, but workable for most combat scenarios. Will it be ready in time, John asked. Michael nodded cautiously. Dr. Chen is flying in tomorrow to help us implement it. With her direct assistance, we should have a functioning system within a week. That gives us 2 weeks to integrate it with Maria's fire control system and run comprehensive tests before the Egyptians arrive, Doc calculated. Tight but possible. John felt a cautious optimism beginning to emerge. Despite the obstacles and active sabotage, the team was finding ways to adapt in advance. The Thunderbolt might yet become a reality. That evening, as John reviewed the latest prototype performance data in his office, there was a knock at his door. To his surprise, Marcus Reynolds stood in the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. May I come in, Colonel? Reynolds asked formally. John gestured to the chair across from his desk, studying the younger man carefully. What can I do for you, Reynolds? Reynolds sat stiffly, his hands clasped before him. I've become aware that there are suspicions about my role in certain security incidents related to the project. John kept his expression neutral. What gives you that impression? I'm not blind, Colonel. My access to critical systems has been restricted. My team has been reassigned to peripheral components. And there are whispers that compromise code was committed using my credentials. Reynolds met John's gaze directly. I want to state categorically that I have not sabotaged this project or shared information with competitors. The denial seemed genuine, but John had encountered skilled liars before. If that's true, then someone has gone to considerable lengths to frame you. Any idea who might do that or why? Reynolds hesitated. There are several possibilities. I've made my share of professional rivals over the years, and my initial objections to your design approach may have created the impression that I was resistant to the project's success. Were you? John asked bluntly. Resistant? No. Reynolds shook his head firmly. Skeptical, yes. I believed and still believe that some of our more advanced concepts could have been successfully implemented rather than discarded in favor of a more conventional approach. But I would never deliberately undermine an anvil project or endanger the safety of potential users. John studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Reynolds had always struck him as ambitious and somewhat arrogant, but not unethical. The younger man's technical brilliance was undeniable, and his passion for innovation seemed genuine, if sometimes misguided by a lack of practical field experience. Why come to me directly? John asked. Why not take these concerns to Bradley or security? Because you're the one I need to convince, Reynolds replied simply. Bradley follows your lead on the technical team, and security follows the evidence which someone has carefully arranged to point toward me. There was a certain logic to this reasoning, and John found himself reconsidering his assumptions about Reynolds. If the man was indeed being framed, then the real saboteur was still active within the project, and possibly accelerating their efforts as the Egyptian demonstration approached. What do you propose? John asked. Let me help identify the real culprit, Reynolds suggested. Give me limited access to investigate the security breaches without directly involving me in critical systems development. I have expertise in digital forensics that could be valuable in tracing the source of the compromised data. It was a risk, but potentially a calculated one. If Reynolds was innocent, his technical skills could indeed help identify the true saboteur. If he was guilty, giving him limited access under close monitoring might provide the evidence they needed to prove it conclusively. I'll consider it, John said finally. In the meantime, continue with your current assignments and report anything unusual directly to me. After Reynolds departed, John sat contemplating the conversation. His military instincts told him that the younger engineer had been sincere, but those same instincts had been honed in environments where the enemy wore different uniforms and operated under different rules. In the corporate world of defense contracting, the lines between ally and adversary were often blurred by ambition, rivalry, and financial incentives. The next morning brought both progress and a new complication. Dr. Chen arrived from MIT and immediately began working with Michael's team on implementing the BradTech interface solution. Her expertise in cross-platform compatibility quickly proved invaluable, and by midday, they had a working prototype of the software ready for initial testing. Simultaneously, Bradley called with an update on their security investigation. The trap worked, he reported. The false armor specifications were accessed and transmitted to an external server yesterday evening. We traced the connection to a coffee shop in Phoenix, but the trail goes cold there. Whoever did it used public Wi-Fi and a sophisticated anonymization protocol. So we know it's happening, but still don't know who's responsible, John summarized, frustration evident in his voice. Not exactly, Bradley corrected. The timing is interesting. According to security logs, Reynolds was at a dinner with potential suppliers during the exact period when the files were transmitted. John frowned. So if he's responsible, he must have an accomplice. Or he's being framed as he claims, Bradley suggested. Either way, we need to expand our investigation beyond just Reynolds. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Doc Harrison. The prototype was ready for a new mobility test using Dr. Chen's interface solution. John hurried to the testing grounds, where the Thunderbolt prototype waited, its engine rumbling with contained power. This time, as the tank moved across the test course, the difference was immediately apparent. Gone was the hesitant, lurching motion of previous tests. Instead, the vehicle moved with smooth, responsive precision, executing turns and acceleration commands with only minimal delay. Remarkable improvement, John commented as he watched through binoculars. Beside him, Michael nodded, a hint of pride breaking through his professional demeanor. Chen's solution is brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to fully integrate with BradTech's proprietary systems, we're essentially speaking their language, but maintaining our own dialect. The success of the mobility test represented a critical milestone. With the chassis integration problems largely resolved, they could now focus on weapons integration and the final fire control systems, both essential components for the upcoming Egyptian demonstration. As the test concluded, John gathered the core team to update them on the timeline and remaining challenges. The mood was cautiously optimistic, buoyed by the day's technical breakthrough, but tempered by the ongoing security concerns in the looming deadline. "We're making excellent progress," John acknowledged, "but we're not out of the woods yet. The fire control systems still need to be integrated with Dr. Chen's interface solution, and we need to complete at least 50 hours of reliability testing before the Egyptians arrive." Maria Gonzalez raised a hand. "My team has the fire control code ready for integration. We've added additional security measures to prevent further tampering, but it will take time to fully test the system under all potential combat scenarios. Prioritize the scenarios most likely to be demonstrated to the Egyptians," John instructed. "Desert operations, stationary and moving target engagement, night operations. We can complete the full testing regimen after the demonstration." Doc Harrison looked concerned. "Rushing the safety testing isn't standard procedure, Thunderbolt. If something goes wrong during the demonstration, nothing will go wrong," John stated with more confidence than he entirely felt. "We'll conduct sufficient testing to ensure basic safety and functionality, but we need to be realistic about our timeline." As the meeting dispersed, Michael lingered behind. "Dad, I share Doc's concerns. We're cutting corners on testing protocols that exist for good reasons." John sighed. "I know. And in an ideal world, we'd run every test in the book before putting this in front of customers. But we don't have that luxury. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and your team." "This isn't about trust," Michael insisted. "It's about responsible engineering practices. The fire control system is directly linked to the main gun. If there's an integration error or if some of the sabotage code wasn't fully identified and corrected, it could have catastrophic consequences." The concern was valid, and John felt the weight of the decision. Throughout his military career, he had sometimes been forced to balance safety against operational necessity, but those decisions had been made in wartime conditions with clear strategic objectives. Here, the pressure was largely self-imposed, driven by commercial considerations rather than battlefield imperatives. "What do you suggest?" he asked finally. Michael seemed surprised by the question, having expected more resistance. "A modified testing protocol. We focus on the critical safety systems and stress test them extensively, while conducting more limited functional testing on the non-safety critical components. It would still be accelerated compared to standard procedures, but with a stronger emphasis on preventing catastrophic failures." The approach made sense, a reasonable compromise between thoroughness and expediency. "Work with Maria to develop the protocol," John agreed. "But keep us on track for the demonstration date. Bradley has staked a lot on this opportunity, and we can't afford to miss it." As Michael departed to coordinate with the fire control team, John turned his attention to the other pressing issue, the ongoing security breach. Reynolds' claim of innocence had gained credibility with the discovery that the false armor specifications had been leaked while he was verifiably elsewhere. But if Reynolds wasn't the culprit, who was? John began reviewing the security data Bradley had shared, looking for patterns or anomalies that might have been overlooked. The team working on Thunderbolt was relatively small, with fewer than 30 people having any significant access to sensitive information. Among those, only a handful had the technical expertise and system privileges necessary to execute the kind of sophisticated sabotage they had encountered. As he studied the personnel files and access logs, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The security breaches seemed to occur primarily during periods when the facility was minimally staffed, early mornings, late evenings, or weekends. Yet the sabotage itself, technical modifications to code, alterations to simulation parameters, demonstrated expertise that few people on the team possessed. One name appeared with unusual frequency in the access logs for those off-hours periods: Sarah Mitchell, Anvil's CFO. Her presence at the facility during non-business hours wasn't immediately suspicious given her senior position and workload. But the correlation with the timing of the security breaches was difficult to ignore. Mitchell had been skeptical of the Thunderbolt project from the beginning, questioning its financial viability and pushing for more conservative approaches. She had access to all the necessary systems as part of her oversight role and the technical knowledge to understand, if not directly implement, the kinds of sabotage they had experienced. But why would Anvil's own CFO work to undermine a project critical to the company's future? The question nagged at John as he continued his investigation. If financial concerns were her motivation, sabotaging the project made little sense. It would only worsen Anvil's position, not improve it. Unless there was another factor he wasn't seeing, a personal connection, a hidden agenda, or external pressure that would explain such seemingly self-destructive behavior. John decided to take his suspicions to Bradley, but discreetly. Before making any accusations against a senior executive, he needed more concrete evidence. That evening, as the facility quieted for the night, John implemented his own trap. With Michael's help, he established a monitoring system on Mitchell's workstation that would record her activities without being easily detectable. It was a risk both professionally and legally, but one he felt justified given the stakes. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Chen's interface solution was fully integrated with Maria's fire control system, allowing the Thunderbolt prototype to track and simulated engage targets while moving. Doc Harrison's team refined the mobility systems, improving response time and cross-country performance to levels that approached or even exceeded those of dedicated frontline tanks. The progress was impressive, but John remained vigilant for signs of further sabotage. His monitoring of Mitchell's activities had revealed nothing overtly suspicious, a disappointment but also a relief. The last thing the project needed was the discovery that a senior Anvil executive was actively working against them. 10 days before the Egyptian demonstration, John called the core team together for a comprehensive status review. The prototype was now fully functional, capable of demonstrating all the key capabilities they had promised: mobility, firepower, and the adaptability of the universal turret concept. "We've made remarkable progress," John acknowledged, looking around at the tired but proud faces of his team. "The Thunderbolt is ready for initial field demonstrations, but we still have work to do before the Egyptians arrive." He outlined the remaining tasks: completion of the safety testing protocols, development of the demonstration scenario, preparation of technical briefing materials, and continued vigilance against potential sabotage. "The next 10 days will be critical," he concluded. "If we maintain our current pace and focus, we'll be ready to show the Egyptians something that will genuinely impress them. Not a finished product, perhaps, but a concept with undeniable potential." As the meeting dispersed, Bradley pulled John aside. "A word in private?" In John's office, Bradley's expression was grave. "We've received some concerning intelligence. Robert Gardner from Defense Tech has been meeting with representatives from General William Stone's office at the Pentagon." John frowned. General Stone was the Army's chief of armored vehicle procurement, a powerful figure in determining which systems received development funding and eventual contracts. "What's Gardner doing talking to Stone?" "Defense Tech doesn't have any active tank development programs with the Army." "That's what worries me," Bradley replied. "Our sources indicate they're discussing the Thunderbolt project, specifically our partnership with Brad Tech and potential regulatory concerns." The implications were troubling. If Gardner could convince Stone that the Thunderbolt project involved questionable technology transfers or regulatory gray areas, the general might use his considerable influence to block Anvil from export approvals or even domestic contracts. "Stone has never been a fan of private development outside the traditional defense procurement channels," John noted. "He sees companies like Anvil as upstarts challenging the established order." Bradley nodded. "And Gardner is playing to that prejudice, positioning Defense Tech as the responsible contractor that works within the system while painting us as cowboys willing to bend the rules." "Can he actually block the Egyptian deal?" John asked. "Not directly," Bradley admitted, "but if he raises enough regulatory concerns, he could delay the export approval process indefinitely. And if the Egyptians get wind of potential regulatory issues, they'll look elsewhere," John finished the thought. "Probably to the Russians or Chinese, who won't have the same scruples about technology transfer." The conversation added a new dimension of urgency to the upcoming demonstration. It wasn't just about impressing the Egyptians with the Thunderbolt's capabilities. It was about doing so convincingly enough to overcome any doubts Gardner and Stone might try to sow. As Bradley departed, John remained in his office, contemplating this latest challenge. The Thunderbolt project had faced and overcome numerous obstacles, technical difficulties, active sabotage, partnership complications. But political opposition from within the Pentagon itself represented a different kind of threat, one that couldn't be addressed through engineering solutions or security measures. He was still considering this problem when Michael appeared at his door, his expression unusually animated. "We found something," Michael announced without preamble. "Something about the security breaches." John straightened, instantly alert. "What is it?" "It's not Mitchell," Michael said. "We've been looking at the wrong people entirely. The breaches aren't coming from inside the Thunderbolt team or Anvil's executive leadership. They're coming from the IT department. John frowned in confusion. The IT department, they have access to the systems, but not the expertise to execute the kind of technical sabotage we've seen. That's just it, Michael explained, stepping into the office and closing the door. They're not the ones actually performing the sabotage. They're creating the access pathways for someone else, someone external, to do it remotely. The pieces began falling into place in John's mind. An insider providing access for an outside actor. Who in IT? A systems administrator named Peter Jenkins, Michael replied. He was hired 6 months ago, supposedly with excellent references. But Dr. Chen helped me run a deeper background check. Those references? They trace back to shell companies owned by defense tech subsidiaries. Gardner planted him, John said, the realization dawning. He put his own man inside our IT department months ago, preparing for exactly this situation. Michael nodded grimly. Jenkins has been creating backdoor access points in our networks discreet enough that they wouldn't be caught in standard security scans. Someone from defense tech has been using those backdoors to access our systems, steal information, and sabotage our work. It was an audacious strategy, one that spoke to the lengths Gardner was willing to go to ensure the Thunderbolt project failed. Not just competitive intelligence gathering or political maneuvering, but active corporate espionage and sabotage. Do we have proof? John asked. Something that would stand up legally? Dr. Chen is working on that now, Michael replied. She's tracing the connections and documenting the evidence, but we're certain enough to act internally. Jenkins needs to be removed from the system immediately before he can cover his tracks or create additional backdoors. John agreed, immediately calling Bradley to brief him on the discovery. The CEO authorized immediate action, and within hours, Jenkins was escorted from the facility, his access revoked, and a team of security specialists began the process of identifying and closing all the backdoor access points he had created. The discovery and removal of the infiltrator marked a significant turning point for the Thunderbolt project. With the source of the security breaches identified and addressed, the team could focus fully on preparing for the Egyptian demonstration without the constant threat of sabotage hanging over them. The final days before the demonstration were a whirlwind of activity. The prototype underwent its last round of testing, consistently performing at or above expectations. The universal turret concept proved its value, demonstrating the ease with which different weapon systems and electronics packages could be integrated to meet specific customer requirements. Dr. Chen's interface solution continued to improve, reducing the response latency to levels that were barely perceptible in normal operations. Maria's fire control system achieved remarkable accuracy, even when engaging targets while the tank was moving at speed across rough terrain. 3 days before the Egyptians were due to arrive, John organized a full dress rehearsal of the demonstration. The Thunderbolt performed flawlessly, executing a series of mobility maneuvers before engaging simulated targets at ranges up to 3 kilometers with impressive precision. As the team gathered to review the results, there was a palpable sense of accomplishment. What had seemed nearly impossible just weeks earlier was now a reality, a functioning, impressive tank prototype ready for international evaluation. I want to thank each of you, John said, addressing the assembled team. What you've accomplished in this time frame is nothing short of remarkable. The Thunderbolt isn't just a tank, it's a testament to what can be achieved when experience and innovation work together toward a common goal. The words were meant for everyone, but his gaze found Michael, who nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Father and son had found a new understanding through the project, their different perspectives complementing rather than conflicting with each other. As the team celebrated their achievement, Bradley arrived with an unexpected guest, Klaus Weber, from BradTech, who had flown in specifically to see the prototype in action. Impressive, truly impressive, Weber said, shaking John's hand warmly. When I heard about your demonstration plans, I had to see for myself what you had accomplished, especially after our difficulties. John introduced Weber to the key team members, particularly highlighting Michael and Dr. Chen's role in developing the interface solution that had overcome the integration challenges. Your team found a solution where our engineers said none was possible, Weber acknowledged with professional admiration. This kind of innovative thinking is exactly why BradTech wishes to reconsider our partnership agreement. The news was unexpected, but welcome. With BradTech back on board as a full partner, the Thunderbolt's path to production would be significantly smoother, and the lingering concerns about technology transfer and regulatory compliance would be largely addressed. As Weber and Bradley departed to discuss the details of the renewed partnership, John found himself standing beside his son, both of them watching the Thunderbolt prototype as the maintenance team prepared it for the upcoming demonstration. "We did it," Michael said quietly. "Despite everything sabotage, technical challenges, impossible deadlines, we actually did it." John nodded, a rare smile crossing his weathered features. "We did, together." The acknowledgement was simple but profound, recognizing the journey they had undertaken not just as colleagues, but as father and son. The Thunderbolt project had tested them both professionally and personally, forcing them to confront their differences and find common ground in their shared commitment to excellence. As the desert sun set behind the Arizona mountains, painting the sky in dramatic hues of orange and purple, John Steele felt a deep satisfaction that transcended the technical achievements or potential business success. He had helped create something valuable, something that represented the best of what he had learned throughout his long career. And in doing so, he had built a bridge to his son and to the future, a legacy not just of steel and fire, but of wisdom and innovation working in harmony. The morning of the Egyptian delegation's arrival dawned clear and bright, the Arizona sky a perfect blue canvas stretching endlessly above the Anvil Defense Testing Grounds. John Steele stood at the observation platform overlooking the demonstration area, watching as technicians made final adjustments to the Thunderbolt prototype. The vehicle gleamed in the morning sun, its desert tan paint scheme chosen specifically to appeal to potential Middle Eastern customers. "Everything's ready," Doc Harrison reported, joining John at the railing. "Final systems check completed 30 minutes ago, all parameters within optimal ranges." John nodded, his expression composed, but his mind racing through countless contingencies and potential scenarios. After weeks of overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, they had reached the moment of truth. Today, the Thunderbolt would either prove itself worthy of international consideration or join the long list of promising but ultimately unsuccessful defense projects. "Any word from Bradley about the visitors?" John asked. "They landed at Phoenix an hour ago, should be here by 10. Doc studied his old friend's face. "You nervous, Thunderbolt?" John allowed a small smile. "Not about the tank. She'll perform. I'm more concerned about the politics." The revelation that Robert Gardner had been meeting with General Stone at the Pentagon had added a new dimension of uncertainty to the demonstration. While the Egyptian military representatives were the official audience, the real battle might be happening behind the scenes, in the corridors of Washington power, where Gardner was attempting to undermine the project through regulatory concerns. "One thing at a time," Doc advised. "Impress the Egyptians first, deal with Pentagon politics later." It was sound advice, grounded in the military pragmatism they both shared. Focus on the immediate objective, then advance to the next. John checked his watch. There were still 2 hours before the delegation arrived, plenty of time for one final review with the team. He found them gathered in the main control center, where Maria Gonzalez was conducting a last-minute briefing on the fire control demonstration sequence. Michael stood nearby, deep in conversation with Dr. Chen, who had agreed to stay for the demonstration despite having technically completed her consulting role. "Final status report," John requested as he entered. The team straightened, professional pride evident in their posture despite the exhaustion of recent weeks. Maria spoke first. "Fire control systems fully operational, Colonel. Targeting accuracy at 98% under all tested conditions. The universal turret is performing exactly as designed, with seamless transitions between weapons configurations. Mobility systems are green across the board," Doc added. "Response time is within 5 milliseconds of specifications consistent with frontline combat vehicles." Michael stepped forward. "Communications and control interface is stable. Jitter Chen's solution has been running without a single glitch for 72 hours straight." John acknowledged their reports with a nod. "Excellent work, all of you. This is what we've been working toward, not just a functional prototype, but a revolutionary concept in tank design. Today we demonstrate that the Thunderbolt represents the future of armored warfare, adaptable, precise, and cost-effective." He paused, looking at each team member in turn. "Whatever happens today, you should be proud. You've accomplished something remarkable under extraordinary circumstances." The words weren't just encouragement, they were a genuine acknowledgement of the team's achievements. Despite active sabotage, technical challenges, and political opposition, They had created something innovative and valuable, a tank platform that could genuinely change the international market. 1 hour to showtime, John concluded. Final positions and assignments as briefed. Let's make this count. As the team dispersed to their stations, Michael approached his father. Bradley just called. The Egyptians are bringing an unexpected guest, General Stone. John's expression hardened. Stone? What's he doing here? This isn't a Pentagon evaluation. Apparently, he invited himself as an observer, given America's strategic relationship with Egypt, Michael explained. Bradley couldn't exactly refuse a 4-star general, even on short notice. The development was concerning. Stone's presence suggested that Gardner's efforts to involve the Pentagon in undermining the Thunderbolt project were progressing faster than anticipated. Having the general observe firsthand would either validate the concept or provide ammunition for regulatory objections. Change of plans, John decided. I want you to lead the technical briefing personally. Focus on the innovative aspects of the interface solution in the universal turret concept. Emphasize how the design complies with all relevant technology transfer regulations. Michael looked surprised. You're the project leader. Shouldn't you handle the VIPs? I'll be with the tank, John replied. If Stone is here to evaluate the Thunderbolt, he'll be looking for flaws in performance, not just technical specifications. I want to be at the controls when we demonstrate what this machine can do. It was an unusual division of responsibilities, but one that played to their respective strengths. Michael could navigate the technical and regulatory details with precision, while John's presence in the tank would demonstrate confidence in the system's capabilities and safety. What about the Egyptians? Michael asked. They're the actual customers. They'll care most about performance and point to said. Show them that the Thunderbolt can be configured to their specific requirements at a price point below competing Western systems. That's what will ultimately matter for the export market. As Michael departed to prepare for his expanded role, John headed to the equipment room to change into the specialized crew suit designed for the demonstration. The garment, similar to those worn by active-duty tank commanders but bearing Anvil's corporate insignia, felt oddly familiar. Despite years in civilian clothes, the ritual of preparing for a tank operation still came naturally. Bradley found him there, already dressed in an immaculate business suit despite the desert heat. General Stone's presence complicates things, the CEO said without preamble. We suspected Gardner would involve the Pentagon eventually, John replied, securing the final closures on his suit. Just didn't expect it to happen so quickly or directly. My sources tell me Stone is specifically interested in our partnership with BradTech. There are whispers about potential export control violations. Bradley's expression was grave. If he recommends against approval, it could kill any chance of international sales, regardless of what the Egyptians think of the actual tank. John considered this. Then we need to change his mind today. Show him that the Thunderbolt isn't just innovative, it's in America's strategic interest. How do you propose to do that? Bradley asked skeptically. By demonstrating the capabilities that even Pentagon procurement hasn't considered yet, John said. The universal turret concept doesn't just allow for customer customization, it enables rapid adaptation to emerging threats. That's something even the Abrams can't offer. Bradley looked unconvinced but nodded. I'll support however I can. Just remember, we need both the Egyptians and Stone to walk away impressed. The future of Anvil may depend on it. The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on John. After the financial disaster of the Chimera project, Anvil had invested heavily in Thunderbolt as its path to recovery and growth. Failure today could have repercussions far beyond this single project. At precisely 10 o'clock, the convoy of black SUVs carrying the visiting delegation arrived at the Anvil facility. John watched from a distance as Bradley and Michael greeted the visitors, a mix of Egyptian military officials in formal uniforms and their technical advisors in civilian attire. Standing apart from the group, conspicuous in his 4-star general's uniform, was William Stone. Even from a distance, Stone's rigid posture and calculating gaze marked him as someone accustomed to command and scrutiny. John had encountered the general several times during his military career, though never directly served under him. Stone was known as a traditionalist who favored established defense contractors and conventional procurement channels. His presence here represented both a challenge and an opportunity. The morning proceeded according to plan, beginning with a technical briefing in the main conference facility. Through the communications channel, John could hear Michael's confident presentation, explaining the Thunderbolt concept with precision and enthusiasm. The Egyptian delegation asked pointed questions about maintenance requirements, operating costs, and compatibility with their existing logistics systems, all indicators of serious interest. General Stone remained largely silent during this phase, occasionally making notes but offering no comments or questions. His presence alone, however, created a palpable tension in the proceedings. After the briefing, the delegation was escorted to the observation platform overlooking the testing grounds. The moment had arrived for the practical demonstration, the element that would ultimately determine the Thunderbolt's fate. John, already positioned in the tank commander's seat within the Thunderbolt, activated his communications link. Control, this is Thunderbolt Actual. We're ready to begin demonstration sequence Alpha. Confirmed, Thunderbolt Actual, Maria's voice replied from the control center. Delegation is in position. You are clear to proceed. John looked to his crew for this demonstration, a hand-picked team of Anvil's most experienced test operators. In the gunner's position sat James Wilson, his steady hands on the fire control systems. Eric Rodriguez, a former Abrams driver with multiple combat tours, controlled the mobility systems. The loader's position was occupied by Kevin Mason, whose methodical precision ensured the smoothest possible operation of the ammunition handling system. Let's show them what this machine can do, John said to his crew. Then to Control, beginning demonstration sequence now. The Thunderbolt's engine roared to life, its powerful turbine creating a distinctive howl that echoed across the desert landscape. With practiced precision, Rodriguez guided the tank forward, accelerating smoothly toward the first demonstration area, a mobility course designed to showcase the vehicle's speed and agility. From the observation platform, the delegation watched as the Thunderbolt navigated obstacles that would challenge even lighter vehicles' steep inclines, water obstacles, trenches, and uneven terrain. The tank moved with remarkable fluidity, its advanced suspension system absorbing impacts that would have rattled conventional designs. Current speed 45 miles per hour over uneven terrain, John reported, knowing his words were being relayed to the observers, maintaining full weapon stabilization throughout. To demonstrate this claim, Wilson tracked a series of moving targets with the main gun, the turret rotating smoothly despite the tank's rapid movement across the rough ground. On command, he fired simulated rounds, each scoring direct hits that were displayed on the observers' monitors. 97% accuracy while moving at combat speed, Maria announced to the delegation, significantly higher than current generation tanks under similar conditions. Next came the universal turret demonstration. The Thunderbolt moved to a designated area where a maintenance team waited. In under 8 minutes, they removed the current 120mm smoothbore cannon and replaced it with an alternative weapon system, a 105mm gun more compatible with Egypt's existing ammunition stocks. The rapid reconfiguration, performed under realistic field conditions, showcased one of the Thunderbolt's most innovative features. Configuration change complete, John reported, proceeding to firing demonstration with alternative weapon system. The tank moved to this firing range, where targets had been positioned at various distances from 500 to 3,500 meters. Wilson engaged each in sequence, demonstrating comparable accuracy with the newly installed weapon, a clear illustration of the universal turret's adaptability. Throughout the demonstration, John maintained a running commentary, highlighting features that would appeal specifically to the Egyptian requirements: desert, optimized cooling systems, simplified maintenance procedures, and compatibility with existing infrastructure. As the sequence neared its conclusion, John made a decision to deviate slightly from the planned demonstration. Control requesting permission for sequence Delta. There was a brief pause before Bradley's voice came through the communication system. Sequence Delta is not part of the approved demonstration plan, Thunderbolt. The tank is performing above specifications, John replied. Delta will showcase capabilities unique to the platform. Another pause, longer this time. John knew Bradley was weighing the risks against the potential impact. Finally, permission granted for Sequence Delta. Proceed with caution. Sequence Delta was a high-risk, high-reward demonstration that John had developed but which had been considered too ambitious for the initial presentation. It involved engaging multiple moving targets while the tank itself executed evasive maneuvers, a scenario more typical of actual combat than standard demonstrations. All stations, prepare for Sequence Delta, John instructed his crew. Maximum performance parameters authorized. The Thunderbolt surged forward, accelerating to its top speed as it entered a specially prepared section of the testing ground. Simultaneously, multiple target drones activated, moving unpredictably across the landscape. Some represented enemy tanks, others armored personnel carriers or anti-tank teams. What followed was a display of integrated performance that few tank demonstrations had ever attempted. Rodriguez executed a series of rapid direction changes and speed variations, while Wilson engaged the targets in priority order, switching smoothly between main gun and coaxial weapons. Mason maintained a perfect rhythm in the loading cycle, ensuring no delays in the firing sequence. John coordinated the entire operation, his decades of combat experience evident in his calm, precise commands. The Thunderbolt responded like an extension of the crew's collective will, displaying a level of mobility, firepower, and coordination that exceeded even frontline military vehicles. When the sequence concluded, all targets had been neutralized, and the Thunderbolt returned to its starting position, its engine winding down to an idle. John removed his communications helmet, sweat streaming down his face despite the environmental controls. The crew exchanged glances of quiet pride. Their performance had been flawless under the most demanding conditions. Control, this is Thunderbolt Actual. Demonstration complete. Acknowledged, Thunderbolt. Return to maintenance bay for delegation inspection. As John emerged from the tank, he could see the delegation already making their way down from the observation platform. Bradley led the group, with Michael close behind. The expressions on the Egyptian officials' faces were difficult to read, professional composure masking their reactions. General Stone walked slightly apart, his gaze fixed on the Thunderbolt with undisguised interest. An impressive display, Colonel Steele, the head of the Egyptian delegation, General Nasser, commented as they approached, particularly the rapid weapons reconfiguration and the final engagement sequence. Thank you, General, John replied. The Thunderbolt is designed to combine the best elements of proven tank design with innovations that address the realities of modern combat. The performance metrics exceed our current inventory considerably, one of the Egyptian technical advisors noted, particularly in terms of first hit probability while moving. The conversation continued with detailed questions about maintenance requirements, crew training needs, and logistical considerations, all positive indicators of serious interest. The Egyptians examined the tank thoroughly, paying particular attention to the universal turret interface in the crew positions. General Stone remained silent throughout this exchange, circling the tank with a critical eye, occasionally running his hand along the armor or examining specific components. John watched him carefully, trying to gauge his reaction, but the general's expression remained professionally neutral. As the Egyptians moved on to discuss technical specifications with Michael and the engineering team, Stone finally approached John directly. "Walk with me, Colonel," he said, his tone making it clear this was an order rather than a request. They moved away from the group, toward the edge of the testing grounds where their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "That was quite a demonstration," Stone began, "particularly that last sequence. Not standard protocol for a development prototype." "The Thunderbolt isn't a standard prototype, General," John replied. "It's ready for field evaluation now, not years down the road." Stone nodded slowly. "That's what concerns me. Rapid development outside traditional procurement channels, partnership with foreign manufacturers. It raises questions about proper oversight and security protocols. Every aspect of the Thunderbolt program has been conducted in full compliance with defense regulations," John stated firmly. "The partnership with BradTech is transparent and properly documented. Nothing we're doing circumvents established security procedures." "Gardner at Defense Tech seems to think otherwise," Stone said, watching John's reaction carefully. "He's filed a formal complaint alleging improper technology transfers and potential compromise of sensitive systems." So that was it. Gardner had made his move, using formal channels to raise regulatory concerns about the Thunderbolt project. It was a clever strategy, using bureaucratic procedures to delay or derail the program regardless of its technical merits. "Gardner's allegations are groundless," John responded. "His company tried to sabotage our project by planting an operative in our IT department. We have documented evidence of corporate espionage and active sabotage. Bradley can provide the full security report." Stone's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his professional mask. "That's a serious accusation." "With serious evidence to back it," John assured him. "Gardner isn't concerned about national security, General. He's trying to eliminate a competitor who's developed a superior product." Stone was silent for a moment, considering this information. Even if that's true, the regulatory concerns remain. The BradTech partnership creates complicated export control issues, especially for sales to regions like the Middle East. John had anticipated this objection. The universal turret concept actually gives us more control, not less. The base platform can be exported widely, while sensitive technologies remain fully under U.S. oversight. It allows allied nations to obtain modern armor capabilities without compromising our most advanced systems. Stone seemed to consider this argument. An interesting perspective, not how the regulations were originally envisioned, but possibly within their intent. He looked back toward the Thunderbolt, where the Egyptian delegation continued their inspection. The Egyptians seem impressed. They recognize the value proposition, John said. A tank that can be configured to their specific needs, maintained with their existing infrastructure, and delivered at a price point below competing Western systems. And what about America's interests? Stone asked pointedly. How does Anvil selling tanks to Egypt benefit our national security? It was the central question, cutting to the heart of the Pentagon's potential objections. John had prepared for it. 3 ways, General. First, it keeps a key regional ally equipped with Western hardware rather than turning to Russian or Chinese alternatives. Second, it maintains interoperability with U.S. forces through compatible systems. And third, it sustains America's defense industrial base through export sales that support domestic jobs and expertise. Stone nodded slowly, seemingly impressed with the comprehensive answer. You've thought this through, Colonel. I spent 30 years serving this country, John replied. I wouldn't be involved with anything that compromised our security or strategic interests. Their conversation was interrupted by Bradley, who approached with General Nasser. Colonel Steele, General Nasser would like to discuss potential deployment scenarios with you before they depart, Bradley said, his expression suggesting positive developments. Stone stepped back. We'll continue our discussion later, Colonel. I have some additional questions about the fire control systems. As Stone moved away to examine other aspects of the prototype, Bradley leaned in close to John. The Egyptians are more than interested. They're ready to discuss terms. 200 units with options for follow-on orders, contingent on export approval, of course. It was the outcome they had hoped for, the validation of the Thunderbolt concept through concrete customer interest. Yet the export approval remained a significant hurdle, one that Stone could influence substantially, either positively or negatively. John spent the next hour with General Nasser, discussing how the Thunderbolt would integrate with Egyptian doctrine and addressing specific operational scenarios. The general's questions were sophisticated and practical, reflecting a serious intent to pursue acquisition if the regulatory hurdles could be overcome. As the delegation prepared to depart, Nasser shook John's hand firmly. We look forward to the formal proposal, Colonel Steele. The Thunderbolt represents exactly the kind of capability modernization we've been seeking. The visitors departed in their convoy of SUVs, leaving the Anvil team simultaneously elated by the positive reception and concerned about the regulatory challenges ahead. General Stone had remained non-committal, his final comments focused on technical details rather than broader policy implications. Well, Bradley asked as they watched the vehicles disappear in the distance, what's your read on Stone? John considered the question carefully. He's skeptical but not closed-minded. His concerns are legitimate from a Pentagon perspective. But I think we made an impression with the technical capabilities, especially the final demonstration sequence. The Egyptians certainly were impressed, Bradley noted. Nasser practically had his checkbook out. If we can get the export approval, that's still a big if, John cautioned. Stone has significant influence with the regulatory committees, and Gardner will continue pushing his objections through any channel available. Bradley nodded grimly. Then we need to address Stone's concerns directly and decisively. I've invited him to dinner tonight at my home. I want you there along with Michael and Klaus Weber from BradTech. We need to present a united front and directly address the regulatory questions. The dinner meeting represented a critical opportunity to secure Stone's support, or at least neutralize his objections. Without Pentagon opposition, the export approval process would proceed normally. With active resistance, it could be delayed indefinitely, potentially killing the Egyptian deal and the Thunderbolt's commercial prospects. That evening, at Bradley's luxurious desert home overlooking the Phoenix Valley, John arrived to find Michael already engaged in technical discussion with Klaus Weber and General Stone. The atmosphere was formally cordial, with the underlying tension largely masked by professional courtesy. The integration methodology is fully documented and transparent, Michael was explaining, gesturing to technical diagrams displayed on a tablet. There's complete separation between the chassis control systems and the weapons electronics. Stone nodded, examining the diagrams with evident technical understanding. The interface layer is the critical component from a regulatory perspective. That's where potential technology transfer concerns would arise. Which is precisely why we developed it ourselves, Michael pointed out. Dr. Chen's solution doesn't reverse engineer or expose BradTech's proprietary systems. It simply communicates with them through defined protocols. John observed the exchange with quiet pride. Michael was handling the technical explanation with confidence and precision, addressing Stone's concerns directly without becoming defensive. It was exactly the approach needed for this audience: factual, detailed, and transparent. Dinner itself was a carefully orchestrated affair, with conversation initially focused on neutral topics: military history, technology trends, and international relations. Bradley played the role of gracious host perfectly, ensuring the discussion remained collegial while steering it gradually toward the substantive issues. It was over dessert that Stone finally broached the central question. Gentlemen, I appreciate the technical briefings and the impressive demonstration today, but I must be direct about my concerns. The defense procurement system exists for a reason: to ensure proper oversight, testing, and alignment with national security interests. Projects like Thunderbolt that develop outside that system inherently raise questions. With respect, General, Bradley responded, the traditional procurement system is optimized for developing weapons, specifically for U.S. forces, often at significant cost and with extended timelines. The export market has different requirements and constraints. Companies like BradTech and Anvil must innovate to address international needs, Weber added, but always within the framework of our respective national security protocols. Stone turned to John. And you, Colonel Steele? After 30 years in uniform, do you believe private development of armored vehicles serves our strategic interests? It was a pointed question, challenging John to reconcile his military background with his current role in the private sector. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. I believe in giving our warfighters the best possible equipment, John began carefully. Throughout my career, I saw how the procurement system could both enable and hinder that goal. The Abrams is a magnificent tank, but its development took over a decade and billions of dollars. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The Thunderbolt represents a complementary approach designed specifically for allies who need modern capabilities but can't afford or don't require the absolute cutting edge. By providing these nations with a reliable, effective alternative, we prevent them from turning to competitors whose interests may not align with ours. Stone considered this, his expression thoughtful. A pragmatic perspective, but it doesn't address the specific regulatory concerns about technology transfer. Perhaps I can address those directly, Klaus Weber interjected. BradTech operates under some of the strictest export controls in the world. German regulations prohibit the transfer of certain technologies to specific regions or end users. Our partnership with Anvil is structured precisely to ensure compliance with these restrictions while still enabling the development of an effective system. The conversation continued late into the evening, delving into specific technical and regulatory details. Stone asked probing questions about the universal turret interface, the fire control architecture, and the protocols for ensuring technology segregation. Michael and Weber provided comprehensive answers, occasionally supported by John's practical insights from a commander's perspective. As the evening wound down, Stone seemed less openly skeptical, though still not entirely convinced. You've given me much to consider, gentlemen. I appreciate the transparency and detailed information. Does that mean you'll support our export application? Bradley asked directly. Stone shook his head slightly. I can't make that commitment tonight. There are procedures that must be followed, reviews that must be conducted. But I can assure you that I'll approach the matter with an open mind, based on the facts rather than competitive allegations. It wasn't the unequivocal support they had hoped for, but it represented progress. Stone was no longer viewing the Thunderbolt primarily through the lens of Gardner's objections, but was forming his own assessment based on direct information. As the gathering dispersed, Stone pulled John aside. One last question, Colonel, off the record. John nodded for him to continue. If you were still in uniform, commanding tanks in the field, would you want the Thunderbolt under your command, not for political or commercial reasons, but purely as a fighting vehicle? The question cut to the heart of the matter, bypassing the complex regulatory and business considerations to focus on the tank's fundamental purpose as a weapon of war. John didn't hesitate. Without question, General, It combines proven reliability with adaptive capabilities that would be invaluable in combat. It's not just a good tank, it's the right tank for the evolving battlefield. Stone studied him for a moment, seeming to weigh the sincerity of his response. Thank you for your candor, Colonel. That perspective carries weight with me. The following week was one of anxious waiting. The Egyptian delegation had returned home to prepare their formal acquisition proposal, contingent on export approval. Bradley was in constant communication with regulatory officials, addressing questions and providing additional documentation about the Thunderbolt's design in the BradTech partnership. John focused on preparing the comprehensive testing data that would support the export application, ensuring that every aspect of the tank's performance and safety was thoroughly documented. Michael worked with Weber to refine the technical specifications for the production version, incorporating lessons learned from the prototype. 7 days after the demonstration, Bradley called an emergency meeting of the core team. His expression as they gathered in the conference room was grave. Gardner has escalated his campaign against the Thunderbolt, he announced without preamble. He's filed formal objections with 3 different regulatory bodies, claiming national security concerns. And he's launched a media offensive, with articles appearing in defense publications questioning the propriety of our partnership with BradTech. John had anticipated this move. Gardner, having failed to sabotage the project directly, was now attempting to kill it through regulatory obstruction and public relations attacks. What's our response? Maria asked. On the regulatory front, we're providing comprehensive documentation addressing each of his claims, Bradley explained. Our legal team is confident we can refute the technical allegations. But the public relations battle is more challenging. Perception matters in these situations, and Gardner has relationships with key defense journalists. What about General Stone? Michael inquired. Has he taken a position? Bradley shook his head. Not publicly. He's requested additional technical information about the fire control system integration, which we've provided, but he hasn't indicated support or opposition yet. The situation was precarious. Without clear Pentagon support, the export approval process could drag on indefinitely, potentially causing the Egyptians to lose interest or look elsewhere. Yet there was little they could do but wait and continue refining the Thunderbolt design. 3 days later, John was working late in his office when Michael burst in without knocking. You need to see this, he said urgently, placing a tablet on John's desk. It displayed an article from Defense Technology Review, one of the most respected publications in the industry. The headline read, Pentagon General questions Defense Tech claims against Anvil Project. John quickly scanned the article, which quoted General Stone directly. After thorough technical review and direct observation of the system in question, I find no evidence to support allegations of improper technology transfer or regulatory violations. The Thunderbolt project represents an innovative approach to allied armor capabilities that merits serious consideration on its technical merits rather than speculative concerns. The article went on to detail Stone's specific refutations of Gardner's claims, citing technical facts and regulatory precedents. It was a comprehensive and public rejection of Defense Tech's campaign against the Thunderbolt. Stone came through, John said, looking up at Michael with surprise. He actually went public in our defense. Not just that, Michael replied, his expression animated. Read the last paragraph. John returned to the article. General Stone further noted that the Thunderbolt's universal turret concept represents the kind of adaptive technology approach that the Pentagon should be exploring for future U.S. armor programs, and suggested that innovations developed in the private sector often complement and enhance our traditional procurement methodologies. It was more than a rejection of Gardner's allegations. It was an endorsement of the Thunderbolt concept and approach. Stone had not only removed a regulatory obstacle, he had provided a powerful validation of the project's fundamental premises. This changes everything, John said, already reaching for his phone to call Bradley. With Stone's support, the export approval should proceed normally, and his comments about Pentagon interest open up potential domestic opportunities we hadn't even considered. Bradley's reaction was predictably enthusiastic. I've already heard from 2 regulatory officials. They're expediting our application in light of Stone's statement, and the Egyptians called this morning. They're finalizing their purchase proposal. The momentum shift was remarkable. Within days of Stone's public comments, the media narrative around the Thunderbolt had transformed from suspicious questioning to interested speculation about its potential impact on international armor markets. Defense analysts began publishing assessments of how the universal turret concept might influence future tank design, with several citing it as a potential paradigm shift. 2 weeks later, the Anvil boardroom was the scene of a small celebration. The export approval for the Egyptian contract had been granted, and the formal agreement signed a deal worth over $2 billion for 200 Thunderbolt tanks, with options for maintenance, training, and future upgrades. To the Thunderbolt team, Bradley toasted, raising his glass to the assembled group. You've accomplished something remarkable, not just a successful tank design, but a new model for international defense cooperation. The mood was jubilant, with team members exchanging congratulations and sharing stories from the challenging development process. Even Sarah Mitchell, who had been skeptical throughout, acknowledged the project's success with gracious compliments to John and his leadership. As the celebration continued, John found a quiet moment to speak with his son. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said simply. "Your technical expertise made the difference at every critical juncture." Michael seemed momentarily surprised by the direct acknowledgement. "It was your vision that drove the project, Dad, and your leadership that held the team together through all the challenges." "Perhaps it took both of us," John suggested. "Experience and innovation working together, like the Thunderbolt itself." The observation captured something essential about their journey together on the project. They had begun as representatives of different generations and approaches, one grounded in battlefield experience, the other in cutting-edge technology. They had found common purpose and mutual respect through the shared challenge of creating something neither could have accomplished alone. 5 years later, John Steele stood on a different observation platform, this one overlooking a military training ground in the Egyptian desert. Below, a formation of Thunderbolt tanks maneuvered in precise coordination, their crews executing complex battle drills with practiced efficiency. Beside him stood Michael, now Anvil's chief technology officer, and Bradley, whose company had grown substantially on the strength of the Thunderbolt's international success. The Egyptian contract had been just the beginning, with orders following from other nations seeking to modernize their armored forces without the extreme costs of top-tier Western tanks. "The universal turret concept has exceeded even our expectations," Michael observed, watching as one of the tanks demonstrated the rapid reconfiguration process they had pioneered. "The adaptability has proven even more valuable than we anticipated, especially as new threats emerge." John nodded in agreement. The Thunderbolt's ability to integrate new sensors, countermeasures, and weapon systems had allowed it to evolve with changing battlefield conditions, a capability that traditional fixed-design tanks struggled to match. "And to think it almost didn't happen," Bradley mused. "If Gardner had succeeded in his sabotage, or if Stone hadn't recognized the value of the concept, or if we hadn't worked together to overcome the technical challenges," Michael added, glancing at his father. John watched the tanks continue their exercises, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction that transcended the commercial success or technical achievements. The Thunderbolt represented something more important, a bridge between generations of military thinking, combining proven principles with innovative approaches. "You know what's most gratifying?" John said, breaking a moment of contemplative silence. "Knowing that crews who operate these tanks have a better chance of coming home because of the work we did. At the end of the day, that's what matters most to the men and women inside the Steel." It was the perspective of a soldier who had never forgotten what it meant to command a tank in combat, the awesome responsibility for the lives within and the lives affected by its awesome power. The Thunderbolt was not just a successful product or an innovative design. It was a legacy of steel that embodied the best of what John had learned throughout his long career. As they turned to leave, John cast one final glance at the tanks below, their powerful forms silhouetted against the desert horizon. The Thunderbolt had faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles, from technical challenges to corporate sabotage to political opposition. Yet through perseverance, innovation, and the unique partnership between father and son, it had emerged victorious, a testament to the enduring value of experience combined with the power of new ideas. In that moment, John Steele knew that his legacy was secure, not just in the machines that bore the name Thunderbolt, but in the wisdom he had passed to his son and the example they had set together of how to overcome adversity through determination and shared purpose. It was perhaps the most valuable lesson a warrior could leave behind.